All right, let's get into it. We're talking about World War I, the monumental conflict that literally redrew the map of the modern world. It was called the war to end all wars, but, well, the irony is that it basically just set the stage for an even deadlier century.
So how on earth did that happen? How did a single gunshot in a city most people had never heard of drag 65 million men into uniform and cause four massive empires to just crumble? That's the huge question we're going to unpack. See, in the summer of 1914, Europe was a powder keg, just waiting for a spark.
And our story doesn't start with a big battle. Nope, it starts with a tangled mess of treaties, a secret web of alliances that crisscross the continent, and basically set everyone up for a catastrophic chain reaction.
By 1914, Europe was basically split into two big rival gangs. On one side, you had the Triple Entente, that's France, Britain, and Russia. They were all kind of united by a growing distrust of Germany's ambitions. And on the other side, you had the Triple Alliance, Germany, the massive but creaky Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Italy. The problem with these treaties was that a small fight between any two countries could pull everybody else in, whether they liked it or not.
And then you get the spark. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, is visiting Sarajevo. He and his wife are shot and killed by a Serbian nationalist. This one political murder was the trigger that set off the whole domino effect everyone had been dreading.
And this is where things just go completely off the rails and fast. Austria-Hungary blames Serbia and declares war. Russia, seeing itself as the big brother to Serbia, starts mobilizing its huge army. Germany, tied to Austria-Hungary by that treaty, has no choice but to declare war on Russia. Germany's war plan then calls for a lightning-fast attack on Russia's ally, France, so they invade neutral Belgium to get there. And that invasion of a neutral country, that's the last straw for Britain. They declare war on Germany. In a little over a week, a system that was supposed to keep the peace had plunged all of Europe's great powers into a massive war.
You know, the crazy thing is, everyone thought this would be a short, glorious war. The soldiers genuinely believed they'd be home by Christmas. But the reality of industrial warfare, we're talking machine guns, heavy artillery, it led to something no one had ever seen before, a brutal, grinding deadlock.
So Germany had this master plan, right? The Schlieffen Plan. The idea was to deliver a knockout blow to France in the west before the massive Russian army could get its act together in the east. But it didn't work. The Belgians put up a tougher fight than expected, and then the French and British made a desperate stand at the River Marne, stopping the Germans just miles from Paris. The dream of a quick war was dead, and both sides started to dig in.
And this is what the war became on the Western Front. A 350-mile-long scar of trenches, zigzagging from the Swiss border all the way to the English Channel. For the millions of soldiers stuck there, life was just a living nightmare of mud, rats, barbed wire, and the constant fear of being blown to pieces.
The whole point of battles just changed. It wasn't about clever maneuvers anymore. The new strategy was simple and horrifying: attrition. It was about killing more of the other guy's soldiers than he could kill of yours, until one side just couldn't take the losses anymore. This quote from the German general about the Battle of Verdun says it all. The goal wasn't to capture a city, it was to kill so many French defenders that their entire army would just break.
And the scale of the slaughter, it's almost impossible to comprehend. Just look at this number, 57,000. That was the number of British casualties on the very first day of the Battle of the Somme. To this day, it is the single bloodiest day in the entire history of the British Army.
But this wasn't just some European squabble. Oh no. This conflict quickly spilled out of the trenches and became the first truly world war.
Out on the open seas, it was a whole different kind of war. Britain used its mighty Royal Navy to blockade Germany, hoping to starve them into surrender. But Germany had a terrifying new weapon up its sleeve: the U-boat, the submarine. These unseen threats could attack without warning from beneath the waves, threatening to cut Britain off from its own empire and its vital supplies.
And it wasn't just on the water. The empires themselves were at war, all across the globe. As you can see from these places, Allied forces started moving in to snatch up Germany's overseas colonies. You had fighting breaking out all over Africa, and halfway across the world, Britain's new ally, Japan, jumped in and captured Germany's main naval base in China, plus its islands in the Pacific.
Then, another major player jumps in: the Ottoman Empire, siding with Germany and Austria-Hungary. This was huge. All of a sudden, you've got brand new fronts opening up in the mountains of the Caucasus and the deserts of the Middle East.
This also put things like Persian oil at risk, which was absolutely crucial for Britain's new oil-powered navy. This single decision would end up completely reshaping the Middle East.
By 1917, after 3 long, brutal years of this, you could feel the empire starting to crack under the strain. The non-stop attrition was pushing nations right to their breaking point, and the stage was set for a massive shift in the balance of power. And the first one to completely break was the Russian Empire. It had suffered just staggering casualties on the Eastern Front, and back home, people were starving. The country just exploded into revolution. The Tsar was thrown out, and the new communist government wanted out of the war, period. They signed a peace treaty with Germany, which suddenly freed up 500,000 German soldiers to go fight on the Western Front.
But just as one huge power drops out of the war, another one jumps in. Germany, in its desperation, made a fateful decision to restart unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking any ship heading to Britain, including American ones. That was bad enough. But the final straw was the Zimmermann telegram, a secret message from Germany to Mexico, basically saying, hey, why don't you attack the United States? When that got out, America was furious. It declared war, bringing its massive industrial power and millions of fresh troops to the fight.
So now you've got this incredible race against time. The German high command knew they had a very small window. They had to use those troops from the Russian front to win the war now, before the full weight of America's army and factories could be felt in Europe.
All right, this is the end game. Germany gambled everything on one last, gigantic offensive in the spring of 1918. It was a desperate, all-or-nothing push that led to the final, decisive battles of the war and the birth of a totally new and very uncertain world.
And it just didn't work. After bending but not breaking, the Allies held the line. And then they punched back hard. In a series of coordinated attacks called the 100 Days Offensive, they started rolling the Germans back. At the Battle of Amiens, they smashed through the German lines. They breached the supposedly unbreakable Hindenburg Line. For the first time in 4 years, the stalemate was over, and the German army was in full retreat.
And after that, the collapse of the Central Powers was just rapid. It was like dominoes falling. First, Bulgaria quit. Then the Ottoman Empire. Then the Austro-Hungarian Empire literally fell apart. Finally, with its army beaten in the field and revolution breaking out back home, Germany itself had no choice. The new German Republic signed the armistice at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918. The guns fell silent.
And the final cost? It's just mind-boggling. 9.5 million. That's how many soldiers were killed. On top of that, another 21 million were wounded. And that doesn't even count the roughly 7 million civilians who died. A whole generation of young men was just gone.
So the fighting stops, and everyone sits down to make peace. But the peace treaty they came up with, the Treaty of Versailles, was, well, it was a whole other kind of battle. It was incredibly harsh on Germany. They lost all their colonies and chunks of their own territory. Their military was shrunk to almost nothing. They were forced to pay billions in war damages, and maybe worst of all, they had to sign a war guilt clause, taking the entire blame for starting the war. This created a deep, bitter resentment in Germany. And that leaves us with the big, haunting question that historians still argue about today. The treaty ended the war, yes. It tore down old empires. But in trying to punish Germany so severely, did it actually sow the seeds for the next, even more terrible conflict? Did the peace to end all wars accidentally make World War II inevitable, just 20 years down the road? That's a legacy we are still living with.